In some mythological tales, the Titan Iapetus was the god who presided over the mortal lifespan, a deity who assigned mortal creatures their finite existence. Much like his brothers Coeus, Crius, Hyperion, and Cronus, Iapetus was considered to be a god who oversaw time itself, and one of the gods who might have taken pleasure in the dethroning of their father Uranus. Homer describes Iapetus by name in the Iliad, and he is thought to have been one of the more destructive of Titans, one who did not shy away from his duty in restraining Uranus so that he may be castrated and dethroned. Where the other brothers may have been reluctant and seen the overthrowing of their father as a necessary evil, there's a chance, going by Iapetus' reputation as being the piercer, that he might have been entirely up for it. Homer continued that Iapetus was seated beside Cronus in Tartarus when the Titans had been overcome by the Olympians. This would indicate that Zeus saw Iapetus in the same vein as Cronus, and reserved for them the same level of punishment for their tyranny. Homer tells us, the undermost limits of earth and sea, where Iapetus and Cronus seated, have no shining of the sun god Hyperion to delight them, nor wind's delight, but Tartarus stands deeply about them. Other iterations of Iapetus paint him as the god of violent death, furthermore establishing him as a being who lived to bring not just an end to one's life, but a terrible one at that. As aforementioned, he was referred to as the piercer, perhaps on the account that he is often depicted as wielding a spear, but also perhaps because it is with this spear that he brings painful death upon those whose life has reached its end. Another idea regarding the piercer moniker is that he might have been a god of craftsmanship, and that the spear was a representation of a tool and not a weapon. Interestingly, both violence and craftsmanship appear quite prominently in the sons of Iapetus, those he bore with the Oceanid and Titan goddess Clymene. These of course were Prometheus, Epimetheus, Atlas, and Menoetius. As Hesiod in the Theogony tells us, now Iapetus took to wife the neat-ankled maid Clymene, daughter of Oceanus, and went up with her into one bed, and she bare him a stout-hearted son, Atlas. Also she bare very glorious Menoetius, and clever Prometheus, full of various wiles, and scatterbrained Epimetheus. The sons of Iapetus would embody the worst of human traits, something you might say that Iapetus passed down to them, and then to us, through Prometheus, the father of mankind. Prometheus would come to demonstrate a sly and crafty streak, as he deceived Zeus. Epimetheus would prove to be a retrospective fool. Atlas was too daring, and ultimately witless, whilst Menoetius was angry and rash to action. All in all, it was these traits that would facilitate their downfall, and it was these traits, amongst the more wholesome ones, that would be inherited and demonstrated by mankind. Therefore Iapetus, or mankind's grandfather in a sense, was responsible for the more dubious aspects of our nature. The Greek poet Pindar tells us, "And of that race were sprung your ancestors, bearers of brazen shields, sons of the maids of the stock of Iapetus, i.e. the descendants of Deucalion and Pyrrha, grandchildren of Iapetus, and from the sublime sons of great Cronus." In other versions, Iapetus was also named the father of Bufagus, an Arcadian hero, who once gave Heracles' brother Iphicles sanctuary when he was injured, before being killed by the goddess Artemis after he tried to court her. Ultimately, it would seem that the sons of Iapetus, regardless of which version of mythology we look at, had ill-fated lives and journeys. Another child linked to Iapetus is Anciale, a Titan goddess of heat and fire, though variations of these are few and far between. Iapetus' role within the mythology goes similarly to the previous Titans we've covered, in that he doesn't appear to do much except father the sons who would have a heavy influence in the coming conflict of the Titanomachy, a war between the Titans and the Olympians for supremacy. Like his brothers, he was one of the 4 pillars that held the heavens and the earth apart, after their father Uranus was disposed of, and this alone establishes him as a prominent figure in the early mythology. When Uranus descended from the heavens to lay with his wife Gaia, Cronus and his brothers ambushed him. But due to his sheer size, Crius, Coius, Hyperion and Iapetus were posted at the 4 corners of the world, where they would seize him and restrain him. There Cronus castrated him, and the sky god retreated to the skies, never to bother the world or his wife with his tyrannical rule again. When Cronus assumed rulership, his brothers segued into the peripherals of the narrative, and are usually seen thereafter as more abstract representations for the pillars of heaven. It is believed that Iapetus would become responsible for the Pillar of the West, a position that in some versions is taken over by his son Atlas, who becomes the sole carrier of the cosmos. This is quite symbolic for the concept of inheritance, or the son inheriting the sins of the father, as Atlas is sentenced to be the bearer of such a tremendous weight. Hesiod would come to describe the role of the Titan brothers, once they were cast into the void of Tartarus, as shifting from physical supports of heaven to more abstract bearers of the entire cosmos. Here, Atlas would become the face of this burden in a more earthly sense, a tangible god who the mortals could perceive, whilst the Titans faded into a more metaphysical sense, and responsible for a more cosmological level. What sets Iapetus apart from his brothers is the idea that he was a violent god, not at all like the beacon of light Hyperion, nor the wise and contemplative Coius, but instead something more akin to the later Cronus, who would extend such violence upon his mother, wife, and children. We know that during his rule, Cronus would come to act not so much differently from his father, after learning of a prophecy that one of his children would usurp him. After this revelation, he descended into madness and proceeded to consume all the children that his wife Rhea bore him. One child, however, that being Zeus, was smuggled out of Cronus' sight and switched for a rock bundled in towels. It was Zeus who would return to free his brothers and sisters, the Olympians, from the guts of Cronus, and would declare war on the Titans in a battle for the ages. But details of Zeus's battles with each Titan are not focal points. Some detail that Iapetus' son Atlas was a general in the battle, and that he was of great concern to Zeus because of his colossal size and strength. Others, such as Valerius Flaccus in his Argonautica, indicate that Iapetus and Zeus went head to head in a fight, and that Zeus himself declared, "It was only after the battle with fierce Iapetus, general of the Titans, and toils of Phlegra, that Olympus's place set me over the universe." Here, Zeus actually confirms that Iapetus was a general himself, and refers to the Titan as fierce, suggesting that this was a thunderous encounter between the deities. He also seems to set Iapetus' defeat as the condition for how he became the ruler of the universe, noting that it was only after this encounter that he was considered worthy by Olympus. In another account, we see Iapetus referred to as a giant by Gaius Julius Hyginus, who speaks of Iapetus not as a Titan born from Uranus and Gaia, but instead a child of Tartarus itself. Whilst we cannot know the thoughts and feelings of Cronus' brothers during his reign, it would appear that they did not oppose him, and remained content to support his tyranny as these very cornerstones. Iapetus, if we can assume he was violent and prone to dishing it out, was probably able to relate to Cronus, and in some ways probably saw more of himself in the young Titan than in any of the others. Remember, according to Homer, Zeus sat Iapetus beside Cronus in Tartarus, implying that he even believed they were both as bad as each other. Whilst the fate of Iapetus is up for some debate, there are variations where he and all the other Titans are released from Tartarus by Zeus after acts of clemency. Aeschylus in Prometheus Unbound tells us that Cronus' sons were released from their bonds, but their activity beyond that is unknown. But let me know if there are any tales about Iapetus that you've heard of, and what you thought about today's Titan. Do you think that he might have had an active role in the conflict with Zeus? Do you think that he was a violent god of death, who might have bitten off more than he could chew? Or maybe he was simply a craftsman, who got a bad rap from his involvement in the castration of Uranus? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and as always, don't forget to give this video a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more content just like this. Furthermore, if you like Greek mythology as much as I do, you might want to pick up a copy of our book, where we retell a couple of our favourite myths and dissect the meanings behind them. With that being said, I hope you all have a good evening, and I'll see you in the next one. Until next time.